if that default, that baseline is met, then the fact that different people are sitting at this table then may be found sitting at some other table, and that individual assortment that that you and I are actually playing among and are part of at this table, that this individualized assortment will have interactions among one another, which are at a second order will be an identity of their own, of our table at play. An interpersonal activation of those second order interactions about what we're doing. And without, again, the need for an encounter group. In fact, if one is to have an encounter group about this, it would probably be a sign that something's wrong with it. And instead, a sensation of joy that we are doing this together. That is a celebration of our differences and the fact that people who are other from us are not capital O other at all. This degree of interaction among us and its relevance to what we're doing in play, and how then play might even feed back upon us and our sense, of what we want to do here, is impossible to discuss with people who consider what I call the default to be, fragile at best, a gossamer even. Better that we pretend that we have it. Better that we fake that we have it. Better that we simply give up on it. Never mind. I'll just hang out. All of those things, those denials, those basically cop-outs, mean that I can't even begin to discuss that kind of interpersonal activation. Without the discussion of the interpersonal activation, there is no discussion of the now amplifications of play that I was alluding to just a minute ago, which would include a degree of investment in what we're doing. I mean, serious investment in what we're doing. People, this is something I want to do. I'm not stopping. It becomes a life priority. This particular game, playing this game with these people at this time, becomes one of my many life priorities. It becomes a degree of saying, I am playing this with you people, with all of you here, on purpose. Then, and only then, can I talk about the different purposes to which we as human beings may put such an activity. Instead, back then, looking at the discussion of these purposes and thinking of game design, because you see that procedural orientation all the way back in the beginning, I mean, it's relevant. But to people who would see just that basic functionality as the be-all and the end-all, and perhaps even not achievable, the idea that I was holding it out as something achievable and that you could do it by something that they thought was engineering, that you engineer the procedures like, turn order and points that you raise and decrease and, dice rolls and probabilities and things, that you engineer those so that purpose would basically, I don't know. I mean, it's very Skinnerian, right? It's very Bird Box. You sort of ratchet people into a widget of procedure so that they cannot help but have this particular, I don't know, epiphany appear. When I'm talking to people who are kind of stuck in that notion of, well, how can we make play work at all? There is no point in talking about the purposes of play. As I mentioned to Pablo, there is no particular sacred aspect to, some some shit stain out there said, oh, it's Ron Edwards is trapped by the rule of 3, and or some shit like that. I have no idea what they're talking about. I know that I have observed 2 identifiable purposes. I inherited the 3 from those former discussions, and by 2005, I had scrubbed one of them out of there because it was clear that it was trapped in that first bubble and was just trying to get play to work at all. And to people who have never experienced that, it seems like the only purpose one could possibly have. I mean, and the thought of any other kind of thing that may occur or things that people would do, it's unfathomable. I mean, it's strange talk. So they would make up shit that, Story Now and Step On Up would be, that would somehow be alternative to playing at all. There's no point in me trying to dissect the byways and the confusions and the dead ends that people managed, the pretzels they tied themselves into regarding this. And it's quite a shame, because there were plenty of people lurking around who are happy to capitalize upon this, pick up on some particular degree of confusion and turn it into product, turn it into a fashion for publication, a fashion for community building in the very toxic sense of the word community. And many of the people who are listening to this can speak, I think, are quite informed about where a lot of those particular efforts went. Nowhere good. So if you're interested in what I think today, well, I'll talk to you about it after I know you're a fucking practitioner, which is not hard to do. The things that make it hard are best abandoned, best left, best walked away from, best dropped. And that one of the things that keeps me going right now is that the coursework and the interactions that add up to play, I have actually seen people fulfill that first set of criteria and say, wow, I don't stress over whether this is working anymore. And, oh, look, I'll try this game. Oh, these rules are cool. Let's get inspired by this too, and we'll do that. And that wasn't hard. And then as they continue, those other levels come into being, because we're people and they're good things and they're fun, non-problematically. So talking about those different purposes as if they were aspects of just making a thing go and what is it even, is really warped. It makes no sense at all. And we're not talking about qualities of a car. We're talking about completely different activities among ourselves as humans. And no, you cannot, I still think a lot of people out there are trapped in the notion of, well, I'm just going to make the Story Now design. I'm going to make the Step On Up design. It'll, they'll play this and bam, they'll just do it because that's what the game does. There is something understandable in that, but I still think that it is trapped in the engineering and widgetry zone. And I do think that trying to satisfy different purposes at this level through, the game design, accommodating them or something like that. Well, let's just say I'm not going to talk to anybody about any of that stuff until I know that you already have amplified play and that you play on purpose. When I talk to people who can do that, instead of just see it sort of flickering on the horizon, or hear me as some sort of, offering some sort of, bizarre, epiphany or enlightenment or something that maybe if you sit next to me long enough, it'll sort of, ooze onto you, I'm just thinking of all the various, martial arts, change your life, yip yap that goes along with, learning how to, hit a person with your elbows. But anyway, the point is, no, that's not me, and you're not going to get that from me. So I hope this has helped to clarify that, and also let's clarify two things. Clarify, number one, I'm not really interested in revisiting, the distorted, tripping on your balls problems of people who can't play, and probably could play if they would let go of a thing or two. I'm not interested in reliving any of that. I'm not interested in going back and saying, well, in this paragraph, you see what I was meaning was this. No, it's not the freaking Torah, okay? We don't have to go and, dissect this paragraph to find out what I meant. What I said made a lot of sense to me in the context of the dialogues at that time. Ideas were in development. We want to talk about what play is as we understand it now, as all of those discourses have proven themselves into blind alleys or as, interesting avenues into understanding something better. There's plenty of examples of both from there. And there's just no point in going, it's like going back into the primordial soup and, before there are cell membranes and before, while we have RNA actually, doing stuff in solution, but the cell membranes are spontaneously forming and, splitting up and lysing and stuff like that. And we can't really say, that life occurs in this puddle. I'm not really interested in going back into that and trying to explain to you how all of that discourse came from me into a much more coherent state. I'd rather just be coherent now. So there you go. Like it or don't. Sometimes I wish that I weren't so purist about answering the questions, or rather responding to the questions in the order that they came to me. It's a conceit. I mean, that's what I do. I just make a file of them as I go along, and there they are in that order. So pretty much all the time, I just start at the top of the page and work my way down them, so that you get these responses in the same order that they were posed to me. Which in this case means that now you're getting the third, semi-pissed off, or at least rather unswerving, uncompromising, and not particularly nice response in a row. If I had sort of interspersed, the nicer ones in between, it would be, a better message perhaps overall. Well, here we go. John has written, I've been rereading Champions Now in preparation for starting a new game. Yay. And have also been reading a lot of comics from 1939 through 1941. Extra yay. Everybody should do that. He mentions, not just early Superman, early Captain America, but the other companies, the characters who have sort of faded in and out of publication ever since, being licensed or bought or something like that, and surviving in brief periods on and off, like the Shield, the Comet, the Hangman. John says, you talk about in Champions Now and on your blog the idea that the Golden Age is a complete myth. Now, he's referring, and as he says here, Golden Age referring to content of comics being naive and less violent. We can also add cheerful, we can also add goofy, we can also add, more positively, whimsical. We could add very child-oriented. We could also add establishmentarian, that, they're about being good citizens, and they're about being good Americans, and they're about being, it's sort of cross Goofus and Gallant, right, with the early Boy Scouts, and that would be the Golden Age comic as conceived by comic book culture, and this is where a lot of the things like the sidekicks and people associated with the tights and The characters are, role models, and they are cheerful and good triumphs and all sorts of things. So, oh, and also very nonviolent, except in an extremely, biff, bam, pow, not particularly violent way. Okay, so the myth that he's referring to is the idea that the early superhero comics, beginning in 1939 and 38, and then proceeding up through the 1960s, were in this. This is what they were like. And then in the 1960s, you get sort of more soap opera-y and more political and more naturalistic, and kind of more troubled or doubtful or multiple motives and stuff like that. And people now call that the Silver Age. You can start that with the Flash in 1958 or with the Fantastic Four in 1961, depending on, whether Coke or Pepsi is your thing as far as comics companies are concerned. So then, according to this mythology, the 70s swiftly bring us the Bronze Age, which confuses everybody. It's the 70s. And then, but what really matters to everybody talking like this is what they think of as the Iron Age, when comics grew up, when comics became violent, when, heroes could kill and curse and, slouch about with stubble and many other things. This is largely in comics popular culture associated with the works of Alan Moore and Frank Miller. Okay, so that's the sort of mythology. And I say it's a lie. And I also am reasonably comfortable in saying this due to, don't know how it happened. Apparently my blogging was interesting to people, and I just kind of got roped into some pretty damn cool comics historians circles, and learned a lot, believe me. So I'm not an insider, but I got to sit next to some pretty smart people and go, and kind of fill my head with whatever was going on. And that's one thing that I brought up and quickly realized that absolutely no one who knows anything about comics takes that mythology seriously whatsoever. It's just counterfactual. So, what John asks, and first of all, he points out, the minute you read some of those comics that he was talking about, you're just like, oh, well, golden age my ass. John says, I wonder if you could expand on your ideas about how the myth of the Golden Age was created, both in terms of primary texts, what the comics being written in the 80s were saying, and what was in them, relative to, this alleged past, and also about secondary sources, fan writing about the older comics. Well, John's familiar with the blog posts in question, and I'll link to them here because a lot of the content is laid out there. I'll summarize a couple of things, and believe me, I will probably have to be my own rabbit hole, rescuer, if I can. Let's see here. First things first. As always, infrastructure matters, economics, ownership, and similar things. And it is worth pointing out that control over the properties, the heroes' depictions and what would be in them and what they would be about, was wrested away from the creators either in the moment of, practically the moment of creation, or afterward through variety of skullduggery. So we're just in the 40s and we're already basically consolidating these IPs from various sources into single companies, and we're also establishing publisher control over what they were going to be because they were developing them into other media already. So even before the ink is dry on the first run of Superman, there's already a radio show. There's already a newspaper strip. There's already, very quickly, animations for the military. for military shorts. And charming and impressive, especially as those cartoons were, there's also competitors on the racks, and then looting from the competitors into the character, for example, of Superman. So all of this is this huge other media IP strategic, the company in question really still like pulling its feet out of this lawsuit riddled legacy of porn and bootlegging, and paper rationing fraud, all sorts of interesting things that basically define so much more than any notion of general culture, like what the demand of the fans may be, or the sense of some vision of the creators. So this is really much more of an infrastructure story than it is some vague notion of cultural effervescence, some vague notion of, well, then people wanted this instead of that, or then creators turns to this after having done that. We can't really talk in those terms. I find them childish. So we have, again, before I get all rabbit holey about this, let's just say this, that first, the company that managed to dominate distributorship and managed to get in with the military and with these other media when the others did not, therefore had a bigger footprint on what these particular characters and things would be like. They had an in-house code that was established in 1941. This was National Comics Alliance, or a variety of names of that sort. You would call it DC today. But that standard that they set, they didn't really accord with very well. So even after their own in-house code in 1941 said things like, the criminal will always be caught, the police will always be depicted positively, the hero does not kill. Well, the stories are still often very, very gritty and extremely variable. It is through a considerable period of time that the 50s bring us some interesting changes. First, that the pressure upon comics being targeted as, creating juvenile delinquents, which was at that time, the big fear phrase, code phrase for a lot of things, but that was the idea. Juvenile delinquency was the terrible thing. And comics were supposed to be, doing this to people. And these criticisms, although associated with the early 50s, actually go all the way back. I mean, it's been going, people have been picking on cartoons and comic strips and comics, for this sort of thing for a really long time. So anyways, under this pressure, which actually corresponds as well to the Hays circumstances with film. So it's all part of this big cultural kind of purification thing going on. The company in question, which was National Comics, and in fact the larger entity, National Periodical Publications, plus Archie Comics, they said, hey guys, we're going to make something that all newsstand comics are going to have. And so if you're a comic book company, you have to accord by us. They made a little committee and they said, we are the Comics Code Authority and you got to pass through us in order to get your stamp. And hey, newsstand guys, if you don't get something with this stamp on it, who knows what could be in it? That would be terrible. So this occurs in 1954. It's associated with an attack on comics, very famous. The book by Frederick Wortham, The Seduction of the Innocent. But that, again, that's not where it all comes from. That's kind of an artifact, the tip of the iceberg of this larger concern. And I would say that at this time, superheroes had to accord with National Comics' notion of superheroes and what they were trying to sell. And they were trying to go for, they were already embedded in TV and comic strips and newspapers and radio and all the rest of that. And they were not going to be giving that shit up. That's what they were after. And they were not going to have any other company have any other kind of superheroes because they already had the lock on that stuff. So therefore, you have in the 50s a dumbing down of superhero content to a rather extraordinary degree. And they were kind of, it kind of wavered through the 40s before that, kind of like this on and off. But there in the 50s is when you get the Weisinger Superman, who had sort of developed through the 40s and now was brought into full force as basically this, Jesus in the sky guy, and in more ways than one. And then you have all these other superheroes who were edgier in other companies and stuff like that basically get taken off. The other companies are like, well, screw this. We can't do this. We're just going to be second banana. And so they focused it on their war comics and on their romance comics and on their horror and monster comics. That would be Timely, of course, later known as Marvel, and a number of other companies as well.